if I were to ask you who is credited with the quote on the screen, I don't know how many of you would get the answer correct, but I think most of you would probably suspect it was Thomas Jefferson who made the comment, "Paper is poverty." And this is this is one of a number of phrases and sayings that have been attributed to the Founding Fathers that have been used to promote the gold standard or used to promote the hard money philosophy of getting away from paper money. And it's also been used by folks either knowingly or unknowingly to sell you things, to sell you everything from coins that were simply for bullion value or numismatics, or get you to follow a particular political candidate. These sayings are the talking points, if you will, of a movement which has taken hold over the last decade here, especially on the internet, where people will see a phrase and the phrase is attributed to someone who was important a long time ago, and that phrase is now going to be used as a mantra to be the foundation of the thing that they say they believe and are willing to spend money to support or to make lifestyle changes in favor of, etc. And paper is poverty is something which every one of you listening to me has probably heard maybe 100 or 1,000 times over the last 5 years alone. And once again, if I were to ask you who said this, who should we credit with this comment, most of you would say Thomas Jefferson. Many of you might say Ben Franklin or Hamilton or somebody, but this is something which you would probably attribute to a founding father said this. Now, I'd like to ask an honest question. And before I go much further into this, I'd like for you to do a little reflection yourself. How many of you could tell me in context what came before these words or what came after them, why they were written, or when they were written? How many of you could go even to the level of context? How many of you? Well, I don't know. I suspect that not 1 in 100 of you listening to me now has ever read the words that came before these words, or has ever seen these words in context, or even can verify if this quote is accurate. I doubt 1 in 100 of you could tell me if this is even an accurate quote attributed to Thomas Jefferson. But it's a quote. It's been used for a very long time to support an idea which we're going to investigate further with the rest of this video. If you go to Google and you search for paper is poverty, you get, according to the most recent search I've got here on the screen, 74 million results for paper is poverty. And when you start going down through the results that you get back, ironically, the third result down is the quote in context in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, a letter to Edward Carrington. However, if you visit websites that make that or use that quote, the websites I've found, without exception, I have yet to find a website that shows the quote in context. Websites, without exception, will show, for example, where is that here? Here we go. Paper is poverty, ... It is only the ghost of money and not money itself, attributed to Jefferson in 1788. So that version of the quote is on one website. Here's another website, Real Estate Investors Daily. And, no. The very first paragraph, 221 years ago, Thomas Jefferson said, paper is poverty. It's only the ghost of money and not money itself. Again, it's a quote as if that's what Thomas Jefferson said. Quote, capital P, paper is poverty. The guy goes on to say, in addition to all the other things I'm not a historian, nor did I even pay attention in history class. However, the other day I ran across some quotes of Thomas Jefferson and was immediately in awe how relative and accurate they appeared to be. The interesting thing is I was thinking in terms of today, not back when he said them. And this is the way this quote's been used. Paper is poverty. It's been used to look at what happened in Jefferson's time and apply it to today. And why not? Founding father, smart guy. And that quote, paper is poverty, seems to make sense given the current financial morass in which we've discovered ourselves circa 2008 to 2014. Another website, Daily Paul. Someone posted at Daily Paul, The Dangers of Paper Money by Thomas Jefferson. And the very first quote about banking institutions, etc., is another quote you should look up the origin of. But, But the quote in question for this video is paper's poverty. There it is, paper's poverty, comma, in this case, paper's poverty, comma, ... It's only the ghost of money, not money itself. Thomas Jefferson, Edward Carrington, 1788. So this is something which has taken on a life of its own, and in this Ron Paul hard money, the stacking gold and silver community, a quote like this has a very specific meaning to a lot of people. Now, given where we are financially in our country right now, it seems to make a lot of sense. Thomas Jefferson, paper is poverty. But check this out. Before we move on to the importance of the quote, we need to look at the quote just in the context of the words around it. So for that, let's look at what came before and after it. The entire quote is, with only 20 millions of coin and 300 or 400 million of circulating paper, public and private, nothing is necessary but a general panic, produced either by failures, invasion, or any other cause, and the whole visionary fabric vanishes into air and shows that paper is poverty, that it is only the ghost of money and not money itself. So moving on to the next section of this discussion with you, you need to note, and I'm telling you, do yourself a favor, go online, go site after site. You will not find this quote in context outside of the original letter in which it was written. But here we go. It is not capital P as a singular idea that paper is poverty. It is not comma ... It is not ... anything. And it is not, it is only the ghost of money and not money itself. It is that it is only the ghost of money, and it's part of a larger discussion. So what is this larger discussion? Because even this, when you expound to this level, and you look at this, you go, wait a second. Jefferson says with only 20 million of coin and 300 or 400 of circulating paper, nothing be necessary but a panic produced by failures, invasions, and the whole visionary fabric vanishes into air. Now, it almost, again, this sounds like it's directly related to where we are today, right? Very little coin in circulation, a lot of paper floating around, and look, we had a panic, right? And we've had failures. Haven't been invaded, but and whatever the visionary fabric was, well, that vanished, right? Into thin air. A lot of people believed a certain thing, come to find out wasn't true. So you would think, looking at this again, Thomas Jefferson clearly talking about hard money versus paper, right? Hard money versus paper. But there is a problem with paper's poverty. The problem is, what is the definition of paper? And what is it he's talking about when he talks about the visionary fabric? What is he referring to? Now, for that information, you do need to look at the actual context of the letter that was written to Edward Carrington back in 1788, and also understand something. The year was 1788, post-Revolutionary War. And in the year 1813, he wrote something different, which we'll get to that in a moment. But in 1788, he wrote something that 25 years later he would give more color on. But we can even look to what he said in 1788 and look deeper into this quote to find out what he really meant. What was he talking about? In the letter to Edward Carrington, it's two very long paragraphs, and when you get to the second paragraph, he begins to talk about some financial issues. He says, referring to the paper's poverty part, the bankruptcies in London have recommenced with new force. There's no saying where this fire will end. Perhaps in the general conflagration of all their paper. I need to stop you for a moment. The bankruptcies in London, we're going to come back to that, and quote, all their paper. Now, it's in the use of the term there and referring to the bankruptcies in London, that the genesis of paper's poverty is born. It's where it was born. We'll discuss there and the bankruptcies in London in a moment, but you have to understand, the phrase in context has been expanded, the actual phrase itself has been corrected, and now the meanings of the words are going to be defined. Jefferson says, with only 20 millions of coins and 300 or 400 million of circulating paper, public and private, nothing is necessary but a general panic, produced by either failures, invasion, or any other cause. And the whole visionary fabric vanishes into air and shows that paper is poverty, only the ghost of money, not money itself. Now look, he's referring to bankruptcies in London and not knowing where that fire would end. So when he discusses paper being poverty, and he talks about their paper, he's talking about bankruptcies in London, somebody's paper, we'll get to who they are in a moment, and not just the general, quote, paper. Now in context, we expand further when he says, since that they have brought in from Holland, 100 years ago, they, whoever they are, had 20-odd million of coin. Since that, they have brought in from Holland by borrowing 40 million more. Yet they have but 20 million left, and they talk of being rich and having the balance of trade in their favor. Paul Jones is invited into the Empress's service with the rank of Rear Admiral and have a separate command. I wish it corresponded with the views of Congress to give him that rank from the taking of the Serapis. The Serapis is the HMS Serapis, which was defended by Captain Pearson in His Majesty's ship, a Captain Pearson against Paul Jones in 1779. So Jefferson concludes a letter with some information above and below, with an aside about Paul Jones and how he thinks that the country ought to use that guy and, quote, every possible opportunity to acquire experience, etc. So the letter in which paper's poverty appears talks about many issues above and many issues below. But with respect to paper being poverty, in context, what's Jefferson talking about? Bankruptcies in London. So to find out more about these bankruptcies in London, you have to look at the credit crisis of 1772. The 1772 credit crisis, of which I will not do a long dissertation on, originated in London and then spread to other parts of Europe, like Scotland and the Netherlands. And why? Because on June 8, 1772, Alexander Fordyce, a partner in the banking house, Neil James Fordyce and Down in London, fled to France to avoid debt repayment, and the resulting collapse of the firm stirred up panic in London. Economic growth at that period was highly dependent on the use of credit, which was largely based upon people's confidence in banks. As confidence started to ebb, paralysis of the credit system followed. Crowds of people gathered at the banks and requested debt repayment in cash, or attempted to withdraw their deposits. As a result, 20 important banking houses went bankrupt, or stopped payment by the end of June, and many other firms endured hardship during that crisis. So now we're taking this even deeper in terms of what was behind this. Go back now and look what Jefferson said again in 1788. The bankruptcies in London have recommenced with new force. From 1772 until the 1780s and 90s and beyond, actually, there was a series of bank panics and credit crises and all sorts of stuff in London and in Europe that had one commonality. Not paper. No, we'll get to the commonality in a moment. But they had one commonality. And at this point in the discussion, I want to stop here, and I want you just to soak in what you've looked at. We've gone from just the general term, paper is poverty, which seems so cut and dry, to a much more nuanced situation where Jefferson, in his own day and his own time, was talking about a very specific set of circumstances that were taking place. And when he referred to that paper, and he referred to their paper, and he referred to the visionary fabric, you now understand, hopefully, that the fabric he's talking about was not that paper was the problem, but that the bankruptcies in London, which were predicated by a system of credit, which had as a root cause something we'll look at here in a moment, that was the problem. And it's the reason I'm trying, let me also say the reason I'm showing this to you as I am, is because a lot of the things you've been led to believe are not wholly accurate. And a lot of the different philosophies you may have been taught or you think you know about don't apply to where we are today. And the ones that do apply in a way that the solutions you're offered are for problems which don't exist. And a lot of the solutions you're offered don't solve where we are. They can, in fact, make things even worse. So I want to stop here from looking at what Thomas Jefferson had to say with respect to paper's poverty and move to another quote from another letter. This is now a letter to J.W. Epps that Jefferson wrote in 1813. And I want to begin with something he starts off at the beginning, which does have a very interesting corollary with today. He says, "This letter will be on politics only, for although I do not often permit myself to think on that subject, it sometimes obtrudes itself and suggests ideas which I'm tempted to pursue. Some of these relating to the business of finance, I will hazard to you as being the head of that committee, but intended for yourself individually, or such as you trust, but certainly not for a mixed committee. Jefferson knew that a lot of the things that he was going to write in this letter, there were even people then who wouldn't get it, wouldn't understand it. And he didn't want to write this stuff down even. And he told J.W. Epps, he said, listen, you know, being the chairman of the Committee of Ways and Means of the House of Representatives, which is what he was, his title was at the time, I want you to read this. This is for you, or for people you trust, but not for not for everybody. There's good reason for that. Here I am. I'm explaining something to you now in the year 2014. I'm breaking this down in a way you've probably never seen. And there will be people who will leave comments on this video who will absolutely claim that somehow I think that I must be in love with Ben Bernanke, or I'm a paper lover, or I'm anti-precious metals or something. None of that's true. But there will be people who are so ingrained with their beliefs that regardless of what the facts are, they don't want to hear the facts. They don't want to see what the truth is. They'd rather have their bias confirmed. Jefferson himself was very clear about that. He himself understood that what he was going to say would be taken by some people out of context and was not easy. It was a nuanced discussion, etc. So I understand that if I say these things, there'll be people who say that I don't understand myself, I don't get it, etc. When oddly enough, I'm going to the source and looking as deeply as I can to find out what these things really mean. Jefferson faced the same problems. I want to scroll down to some stuff that's just startling. It is crazy startling. And I want to read this to you, and I want you to think very carefully about what you see. And remember who said this. Jefferson says, "We then issued bills bottomed on a redeeming tax, but bearing no interest. These were readily received and never depreciated a single farthing. In the Revolutionary War, the old Congress and the states issued bills without interest and without tax. They occupied the channels of circulation very freely, till those channels were overflowed by an excess beyond the calls of circulation. But although we have so improvidently suffered the field of circulating medium to be filched from us by private individuals, yet I think we may recover it in part, and even in the whole, if the states will cooperate with us." Jefferson's saying there, you know, we had some paper that we were issuing, you know, had no interest attached to it and no taxes. They were great until that was taken from us. That right was taken from us from private individuals. You'll see, by the way, who these private individuals were in a second. Jefferson now making the case. We have paper money that would work unless it's filched from us. And he even says, we might recover that, he says, if the states would cooperate. He says if Treasury bills are emitted on a tax appropriated for their redemption in 15 years, if Treasury bills are emitted on a tax appropriated for their redemption in 15 years, and bearing an interest of 6%, there's no one who would not take them in preference to the bank paper now afloat, on a principle of patriotism as well as interest. So Jefferson concedes, listen, we could create paper right now. We could float that paper today, and people would rather use that than bank paper, if for no other reason than just because they're patriotic. Now this flies in the face of what you might have been led to believe, paper being poverty. Jefferson makes a different case here. It's patriotic. And they would be withdrawn from circulation into private hoards to a considerable amount. Their credit once established, others might be emitted. Wow, look at that. Bottomed also on a tax, but not bearing interest. And if their credit faltered, open public loans on which these bills alone would be received as specie. Now listen to this. There might even be loans made that would receive literally those notes as the equivalent of precious metals. Now just read this and let this soak in for a second. Thomas Jefferson. We could solve our problems by floating paper that could be used in the same way you would specie. These operating as a sinking fund would reduce the quantity in circulation so as to maintain that in an equilibrium with specie. It's not easy to estimate, he says, the obstacles which in the beginning we should encounter in ousting the banks from their possession of the circulation. But he says a steady and judicious alternation of emissions and loans would reduce them, being the banks, in time. But while this is going on, another measure should be pressed to recover ultimately our right to the circulation. Scroll down. And this, my friend, is something you've never seen, but you ought to read it and understand it. The states should be applied to transfer the right of issuing circulating paper to Congress exclusively, in perpetuum, if possible, but during the war at least, with a saving of charter rights. You've never seen this. Thomas Jefferson argued that not only was precious metal not the only money, but the solution to that banking problem was paper, in perpetuum. I didn't say these things. It's Thomas Jefferson. Scroll down. He says, I believe that every state west and south of Connecticut River except Delaware would immediately do it. The others would follow. Congress would, of course, begin by obliging unchartered banks to wind up their affairs. And the others, as their charters expired, forbidding subsequent circulation of the paper. I mean, I could continue to read this. I mean, honestly, what you've been led to believe about paper is not accurate. Jefferson even goes on to talk about, are we to have no banks? Are merchants and others to be deprived of resource short of accommodations, found so convenient? Jefferson says, I answer, let them have banks. Let us have banks. But let them be such as are alone to be found in any country on earth except Great Britain. You want these banks? That's fine. Cool. But let them fend for themselves. He says no one has a natural right to the trade of a moneylender, but he who has money to lend. Let those then among us who have a moneyed capital and who prefer employing it in loans rather than otherwise set up banks and give cash or national bills for the notes they discount. You read this stuff and you come away, I hope, with a different understanding, a different reasoning of what Jefferson meant and what you should believe about paper. It's not paper that's the problem. It's about who controls the circulation. Private fortune, says Jefferson, in the present state of our circulation are at the mercy of those self-created moneylenders, prostrated by the floods of nominal money with which their avarice deluges us. He concludes, reflect, if you please, on these ideas and use them or not as they appear to merit. They comfort me in the belief that they point out a resource ample enough without overwhelming war taxes for the expense of the war and possibly still recoverable. And they will hold up to all future time a resource within ourselves, ever at the command of government and competent to any wars in which we may be forced. I know that many of you have believed what you've been told about paper money, and you think that in your quest you have found that metal is the answer. But first you have to understand that paper meant bank paper when Jefferson talked about it, and others, by the way. Paper wasn't the problem. In fact, Jefferson argued paper was the solution. Of course, paper controlled by us. Therefore, metal is not the solution. What is the solution? Our right to circulation. That's the solution. And I don't suggest that precious metals have no value. In fact, thank goodness for precious metals, because that allows us to have the counterbalance to the paper money in circulation today. But the counterbalance to paper money does not mean it should be used as money. The counterbalance to paper money is there and is a positive for us, those of us who look at them as an inflation hedge in times when they are inflation hedges. They are a counterbalance but not a replacement for. And if the words of Thomas Jefferson had been listened to, his actual words, we'd have paper money floated and used without interest attached, without taxes attached. And that is the answer. Now, I know that what I've said here is, if I had just said it myself, would be scoffed at and laughed at. And I know that many people will also argue, because their confirmation needs to be, their bias needs to be confirmed, they'll say, well, Thomas Jefferson could never have seen where we were today. And Thomas Jefferson, the founding fathers were smart guys, but not that smart. I've seen people in the hard money community go so far as to say we didn't even need the Articles of Confederation, that these guys weren't that bright. They really didn't understand. And the people will even go to lengths to impugn the very credibility of the founding fathers that they'd be happy to use quotes of if they understood the quotes out of context. But once you put the quotes in context, and once you look at what these men actually said, and not just Thomas Jefferson, and you look a little bit deeper, you find that the answer for all of us was 200 years ago laid out. The problem is not that metal doesn't back the money. The problem is not whether it's paper or tally sticks or seashells. The problem is that the bank paper is what bankrupted London. It was bank paper that Jefferson didn't want. He actually believed that paper was a solution to our problems financially. And the answer to the problem then is our right to circulation. Not what is being circulated, but who has the right to circulate it. And one final note, he wrote his letter to J.W. Epps in 1813. 25 years after what he wrote in 1788. He went from paper being the ghost of money to paper being the solution to the problem, but with a nuanced difference. Had to be money controlled by the people. Thank you for watching. I don't know how many of you whose opinions have been swayed by this. My job here is not to convince you of anything, except for I do hope what you'll do is you'll begin to look a little bit deeper at some of the things that you think you believe, and some of the things that you think that make sense to you, and some of the quotes from the founding fathers, and some of the foundations of things which are at the core of what it is you think is most important. What you're going to find is the problems which exist are solved in ways that are not presented to you, because some of the people who present those solutions may either not know what the actual solutions are or have some other reason to present those solutions to you. Thank you for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next video.